Today we're going to be talking about the new analog revolution that Behringer is helping create. And out of the 20 or so synths they're currently making, we're going to give you what we believe are the top 5. Stay tuned. Hi, I'm Marr from Alamo Music here in San Antonio, Texas. You can find us online at alamomusic.com. And today we're going to be talking about the analog revolution that Behringer has really pushed forward. Easiest way for me to describe this is that this setup right here previously was only possible with a $20,000 investment in vintage analog synths. You can get the same thing now for a couple grand. And the difference is marginal. The sound difference. You know, you really are getting very close to what the original vintage instruments sound like with each of these. So that's really amazing. It's basically made analog synths a lot more accessible to a whole new generation of musicians. And I think that's really exciting because we're going to hear a lot of interesting music coming out as musicians learn these instruments, as they get them into their hands. So one of the things I want to talk about is the origin of Behringer, because I think it helps illuminate how this came to be, how this analog revolution came to be. So Uli Behringer, who's the founder, he began creating instruments as a kid. And he learned his first instrument actually was an analog synthesizer, which is kind of weird because that's not the first thing that Behringer made, or the thing that kind of propelled them into being a larger company. And he made this because his dad was an organist. And his dad had this passion project. He was a church organist. And his dad, most of his childhood, was building this giant home organ in their house. And he helped his dad build this home organ. And those old home organs were made out of a lot of analog parts. And so he learned how to build instruments from his dad. And he took what he learned and made his own little analog synthesizer back in the day. And the story goes that it was destroyed at some point. He lost it or whatever. But there's some pictures online of the way it looked, and apparently it was really cool. But that's how he began actually making musical instruments. It was an analog synthesizer. And so fast forward into college, when he was in university, the story goes, he had a bunch of friends that were musicians who couldn't afford gear. They just couldn't afford it. And he was like, well, I can build it for you. And so he began to build little modules, little things here and there for his friends that were musicians that had no money. And he was able to get really cool instruments into his friends' hands at price points that they couldn't have afforded otherwise. And that's really where his vision for his company started. And that's always been what Behringer's been known for. Really crazy features at low price points. And, you know, there's a lot of haters, for lack of a better word, about Behringer products. And that's partially due that early on there was from what I understand, there were quality control issues. And there's, you know, old Behringer and some of their early stuff, you know, there was issues. But like with any company that's starting out. But really, Behringer today is a giant company. They have their own city in China called Behringer City, where they manufacture all their equipment. And they're at scale. They own Midas, they own TC Electronics, they own a whole bunch of companies, and their quality control is just totally in a different place than it was. So it's really a different company than the image that a lot of people have in their minds still today. So I just think this is, I'm super excited because I like vintage analog synths, and I think what they've done is really revolutionary. And I think it's still misunderstood, really. So I hope that helped a little bit kind of contextualize where Behringer fits in this kind of new wave analog movement that's been going on the last couple of years. And so what we're going to get into now, they make about 20 or so analog synths, and there's plans to make a whole bunch more. So what I'm going to get into now is what are the top 5 that you really, if you're going to invest or you want to check them out, which ones should you spend your time worrying about and looking at? I think I've picked them out. It's our opinion, but I think that they're a pretty good selection, and so we're going to go into that. So let's start with number 5. Number 5, the Behringer MS-1. So the MS-1 is a recreation of the Roland SH-101, which was manufactured between 1982 and 1987, I believe. And this is an iconic, probably the most iconic monosynth from Roland. And they go for about $1,200 online used. And they found in a lot of 80s music. If you played with it, when you hear it, you'll immediately recognize the sound. It had a built-in sequencer, an arpeggiator, really pretty lightweight, and it even had a little handle for like keytar. It had a little keytar handle that came with it originally. But a very cool piece, great controls, great little interface to play with. And Behringer's recreated it in the MS-1. Plus, they've added, I think they had added an additional waveform to the oscillator. They added a MIDI in and out, and I believe it connects via USB as well. So you get a bunch of kind of modernization on the instrument and like a modern connection inputs and whatnot. And you get the classic SH-101 sound, and it's nearly identical. There's videos online, you can see comparisons. It differs a little bit in the, I think the filter and the noise sound, but for most sounds, it's pretty spot on, and it's truly an analog synthesizer. So really cool piece. That's my number 5. I really think it's fun. Let's listen to it. Okay, number 4, the VC340. So the VC340 is a recreation of the Roland VP330. And it's labeled a vocoder, and I think it's a little misunderstood because it's kind of billed as a vocoder. The VC340 and the VP330, they are vocoders, but vocoders are kind of one-trick ponies. They're, the vocoder sound you can only use so many times. It's cool, but it's not that cool. Let's be honest. Like you can't use it over and over again. It's a little gimmicky. The thing about the VP330 is it belongs in the Roland line to a whole line of string synths, analog string synths that Roland made. So here's an example of one. It's the RS09, one of the earliest string synths that they made. Pretty inexpensive. You can find them for a couple $100 vintage. Pretty fun piece if you want to just buy a true analog piece. But there's a whole line of analog string synths that Roland made that sound very different than their Juno or their Jupiter or their monosynth series. And they're, I think Blade Runner, classic Blade Runner music was made with, if it wasn't the VP330, it was the one right before it. But really awesome analog synth string sounds. And it's a different design than their monosynths or some of their more famous polysynths. The architecture is different. I don't remember it off the top of my head. I'll try and put a link down here that says what it is. But a very different piece and really worth having in your kind of assortment of analog synthesizers. It's just a different tone and it's a different brush, so to speak. So really worth having. The VP330, if you look up you can't find one for less than $4,000. And so again, you're getting, I think this is a couple $100. It's less than $1,000. You're getting a $4,000 vintage synth for a couple $100. And again, you can look up online and see there's deep comparison videos. It's nearly identical. It's very hard. You can get nitpicky and find a few differences, but it's really a true close recreation. So let's have a listen. I'm not even going to do the vocoder because there's plenty of that. I'm going to let you listen to the string sounds because I think that's where the magic in this box really is. Number 3, the Behringer RD8. So the Behringer RD8 is a recreation of the Roland TR-808, the most iconic analog drum machine in existence. So the TR-808 was used in the origins of hip-hop in the 80s, and it's been continued to be used in hip-hop and rap, as well as other genres of music from the 80s on. And it's incredibly iconic sound, and it's a very sought-after instrument. It was a commercial failure when it first launched, so there's only a couple thousand made, and the prices of these are about $5,000 right now. So Behringer recreated these, true analog recreation, not a digital modeling version, not a VST. It's a true analog recreation, and it's a couple $100. Truly amazing. I think underappreciated. Still, I don't know if everybody's aware of how amazing this is. And it sounds really close. In addition, it's modernized. So it's not just a complete replica. It's also got a few things that bring it up to the modern era. So it's got MIDI. It's also got a probability mode and a flam mode. And you can do swinging in the tempo. So it's got a bunch of different kind of modern drum analog drum machine features that have been added into it. So it's not just a TR-808 recreation. It takes that basic kind of recreation and adds onto it and really makes it even more usable. So really cool instrument. Let's take a listen. Number 2, four-way tie. Pro 1, K2, Model D, and the Odyssey. The reason it's a four-way tie and we're grouping them together is each of these is a recreation of a classic vintage synth from different manufacturers. Pro 1, Sequential Circuits, K2, Korg MS-20, the D, the Mini Moog from Moog, and the Odyssey from the ARP Odyssey. And each of these has its own distinct character and is highly sought after vintage collectible. So I believe the Pro 1s go for a couple grand. The MS-20, same thing. The Mini Moogs are like $4,000 vintage, and the Odyssey, same thing, a couple, $2 or $3 grand. And they all have very distinct tonal characteristics that are very different than anything we've gone over so far. They're all kind of halo pieces that are completely unique sounds that were unique to each of these manufacturers. So each of these, there's a Roland sound, there's a Sequential sound, there's a Moog sound, there's a Korg sound, there was an ARP sound. They're all very different, and they're all, I mean, everybody wishes they could have each tonal quality of every manufacturer in their studio. And what's cool about Behringer, and the reason I put it at number 2, is you can bring in these classic tonal brushes from classic synth makers and have it for a couple $100. Most of these are modular, and so they're very easy to put in your studio and don't take up a ton of space, and they are dead-on recreations. Again, there's comparison videos online. Listen to it. You'll be amazed. So that is what we have at number 2. We'll listen to a few of these, maybe not all of them, and tell us what you think. Before we get to number one, I'm going to give you a few runners-up that didn't make it to this list. And the reason they wouldn't have made it on the list is it didn't meet three criteria that we were using to kind of choose these instruments. The first one is it fun to use? That's still the bottom line. Is it fun to play this instrument? And to varying degrees, all instruments are fun to play, but the ones we picked we thought were the most fun. Two, how accessible is it? How easy is it to use? Some of these pieces, especially in the analog and the modular world, require a lot of experience and are very difficult instruments. And while those are great, we wanted to focus on the ones that were easier to use because It's easier to make music with it, and I think at the end of the day, that's what instruments are about, making beautiful music. Number 3, value creation. So how hard is it to make the sound that these instruments allow you to make with vintage? How inaccessible was it before? So for instance, on the RD8, very, very hard to just shell out $5,000 to get the TR-808 sound in an analog form. So great value. So that's the third criteria we use to kind of look at, okay, where's the most value being created in the Behringer line? So those were our 3 criteria. If a synth wasn't on there, it's because we felt like they all to some degree were true on those 3 criteria. It's just they were less so than the ones we picked. So a couple ones that were not on the list, the CRAVE. I think the CRAVE is awesome. It sounds really cool. It's fun to play with. It's pretty simple, but it's just not there. So we almost put it on there, but it's not there. Another one is the TD3. Amazing value. It's a recreation of the TV303, and it is, those are about $2,000, but we didn't include it because it's incredibly hard to use, and Behringer, true to form, created it to be just like the original Roland version of it, and I just, it's a lot of work to use it, but you definitely should get one, like $150, and it's a classic acid bass sound from the 90s. Very cool, but we didn't include it, too hard to use. And then the third runner-up that I, waffled on including was the Neutron. And people really love the Neutron. The Neutron is kind of something they invented. It's like a new take on modular synthesis. It's not based specifically on any recreation. But, I just think you really need to know how to use modular synths to be able to use the Neutron in any kind of meaningful way. And for that reason, I think it's not one that's easily accessible to most musicians. They're going to have trouble with it unless you're already well-versed in modular technology. So those are the 3 that we wanted to include, but we didn't. So now on to number 1. All right, number 1, the Behringer DeepMind. So the Behringer DeepMind was actually the original analog synth that they released. And to me, it is still the most impressive one. It's loosely based on a Juno 106, but really they added so many extra things to it that it bears little resemblance at the end of the day to the Juno 106. Besides, you can be like, oh, this definitely is an expansion on that original Juno 106 idea. So what did they add? They added an LFO. I think they added, it's got 12-note polyphony opposed to 6. And it's got a whole bunch of onboard effects. It's really a powerful synth. You can strip it down and get basic classic Juno sounds, and it does a great job of sounding like a 106 and a 60 based on how you kind of tweak it. But it also is so much more than that. It's a very deep synth with a lot of things to explore. I haven't even gotten that deep into it, but it's immediately fun and immediately accessible like the Junos originally were, while at the same time being incredibly deep, and you can really do some complex things with it. So it's a very interesting kind of contradiction there, where it's incredibly complicated but also incredibly simple and very, very powerful. So that's my pick for number 1, and so let's listen to it. So what do you think? Are these the top 5 Behringer synths in production, or did we leave one off? We'd love to hear your comments below, or send us an email at yourfriends@alamomusic.com. You can also chat with us at alamomusic.com. We like to talk about synths, so whenever, just hit us up. So, in summary, I'd like to say that what Behringer is doing is truly revolutionary. It's making analog synths accessible for a whole new generation of musicians, where previously it was not, because the price was so expensive and there was not really any budget options. And they're really not skimping on quality. These are all quality vintage or quality analog synths that sound very close to their vintage counterparts. And it's very exciting. I hope you are inspired. I hope you go out and try one if you haven't tried an analog synth before. It's a different beast, and it really is an inspiring paintbrush to make music with. So please go out, try one, or if you already have one, try another one. It's really, really never been a better time to be into analog synthesis. If you like this video, please hit subscribe. We'd love to keep in contact with you. We're going to be doing more content on new and vintage technology, and we'll be in touch.